Does Robo want an Oreo? Hope you're ready to relive one of the most unforgettable sci-fi franchises of all time, where a corporate dystopia has taken over and ultra-violence is on the menu. Plus plenty of 80s excess and over-the-top satire. Hey friends, Tyler Nichols with JoBlo here, and I'm so excited to go on this robo-filled journey with you. As a Michigan native, I've always connected with the Detroit-based character and am excited to revisit these with you. First up, we're looking at the trilogy that is quite all over the place in terms of quality, but is never lacking in entertainment value. While Peter Weller only gives us his phenomenal take on the robotic yet heart-filled title character in the first two, we've got Thinner's own Robert John Burke to take the reins, and it's, interesting. We'll then take a look at two different series. The first was a short-lived live-action series from the 90s where we lose out on real bullets and instead get laser guns? Damn you, television! And because everything got turned into a cartoon back then, we're looking at the RoboCop animated TV series. Because when I think violent corporate hellscape, I think Saturday morning cartoons. Then we're zooming ahead to 2014 where we got a remake that stripped the series of everything that made it special. We get a generic black suit, Michael Keaton as a bad guy, and a PG-13 rating? Gross. Let's tear into the RoboCop remake. Finally, we're taking a look at the video game that may as well be considered a part of the cinematic timeline as Peter Weller returns, and we've got a great continuation that takes place between Robo 2 and 3. I'll never pass up on getting to step into the shoes of this walking, talking death machine. So let's enter the streets of future Detroit and see what the f happened to the RoboCop series. Paul Verhoeven's 1987 classic is an unquestionable pillar of the film industry. Few movies have ever stomped so freely between genres and tones like RoboCop does, picking up a bevy of blood on its mechanical boots along the way. You won't find many, if any, films in history that can simultaneously sell toys like hotcakes, critique corporate greed, and feature a bad guy getting shot in the junk. Even the B-movie moments feel like a spectacle, fueled by a brazen disrespect for the status quo, and we just can't get enough of it. Kinda sounds like we're talking about a punk rock horror movie, and in some ways, we are. RoboCop's journey has been documented 6 ways from Sunday, including the impressively in-depth 4-hour and then some 2023 documentary, RoboDoc, The Creation of RoboCop. Today, we're going to look at the classic under a bloodier lens and answer the question, does Robo really want an Oreo?
Robo wants an Oreo.
Today we've got life, death, resurrection, and the horror of what the fuck happened to RoboCop. When aspiring writers Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner were knee-deep in developing RoboCop, most of their inspiration came from other sci-fi properties with horror undertones like Judge Dredd and Blade Runner. But when it came to the choice to brutally kill off their main character early in the film, Neumeier found inspiration in an entirely different place: Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, specifically the infamous shower murder of Janet Leigh's Marion Crane. The pair sold their script in 1985 to Orion Pictures, who then courted director Paul Verhoeven to helm the project. Verhoeven, like many others, took one look at the title and first page and said, no thanks. And who could blame him? Today, the words RoboCop are synonymous with badass, but back then, it probably sounded like the 80s version of someone bringing you a board game movie script. Thankfully, his wife talked him into giving it another try, and he fell in love with the idea of a man losing everything and returning home to memories and loss. With Verhoeven on board, the role of the titular character could have gone to anyone from Arnold Schwarzenegger to Tom Berenger, but for multiple reasons, one of them being his chin, according to Verhoeven, actor Peter Weller landed the gig. He'd later be fired by Verhoeven as the two were at odds with each other throughout the production, and the director planned on bringing in Lance Henriksen. The suit, though, was made to fit Weller, and they ultimately were forced to figure it out. That same suit that helped keep Weller in his legendary role was also a curse. The actor found himself losing around 3 pounds a day from sweating inside it in the Dallas, Texas heat. Though the production had its sweaty all-American hero, it still needed a vile, putrid son of a bitch for him to face off against. Actor Kurtwood Smith might be remembered today as the lovable grump Red Foreman from That 70s Show. But in 1987, he played one of the most ruthless psychos cinema has ever seen. Clarence Boddicker throws his own henchman out of the back of a van.
Can you fly, Bobby?
Spits blood on police desks, and weirdly uses his tongue to deep-pin grenades. He revels in the pain and suffering of others with no shame. Even before the first news break finishes, he's already been credited with the deaths of 31 police officers and God knows how many civilians. Actor Ray Wise, who we'd later see in Jeepers Creepers 2, amongst a litany of other great performances, would be hired to play Clarence's right-hand man, Leon. Over on the corporate scum side, there's Ronnie Cox as Dick Jones. You'd never know it watching Dick move through the offices of OCP like a snake on office carpet and treating the men's bathroom like something out of American Psycho. But Cox had built a career on playing wholesome characters. He relished in the chance to play a masculine bad guy, and by God, he's a great Dick Jones. The late great Miguel Ferrer also had a wonderful time playing the punchable and unfiltered Bob Morton, describing the experience as the best summer of his life. Things kick off with a moment that perfectly illustrates how unhinged and violent the film we are about to witness truly is. It's a classic case of a corporate douchebag in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ed 209 malfunctions and shoots the living shit out of the OCP executive Mr. Kinney in front of a boardroom of his peers, turning him into a human Gushers fruit snack right before their eyes. To achieve this ultra-gnarly moment, actor Kevin Page was strapped with approximately 200 blood-filled squibs that he explained felt like being punched with every detonation, something that he had to suffer twice, as Verhoeven wasn't happy with the original take and called for a reshoot. The real horror, though, was that no one in that room gave a damn. But as Bob Morton said, that's life in the big city. While Kinney's death was a bit over the top and silly, the next one would accentuate the horror of RoboCop in a completely different way. Bright-eyed police officer Alex Murphy has just been transferred from a nice police station into the absolute hellscape that is Metro West Precinct. Murphy quickly wins us over with his clear enthusiasm and poise. Even though it's obvious that he's entered a total shit show of epic proportions, he makes fast friends with his new partner, Lewis, played by Nancy Allen, and gets to work with a smile on his face. We learn that he's the kind of dad who practices cool tricks with his gun because his son saw it on TJ Laser and thought that it was cool. Then the bad guys blow him apart right in front of us. To bring this emotionally devastating moment to life, the crew set up shop in an abandoned auto plant in Long Beach, California. The special effects team featured legends like Rob Bottin and Phil Tippett, as well as others who had worked on everything from The Thing to Empire Strikes Back. To pull off the carnage, they used prosthetics packed with blood that exploded via compressed air, seemingly similar to what Christopher Nelson would later do for the Michael Myers shotgun finger explosion in 2018's Halloween. The prosthetic hand was designed so that they could reset and reuse it between takes, and the arm was fitted with a monofilament wire to sell the effect of it being blown off. For the final headshot, they created a highly detailed replica of Weller's head, operated by 4 puppeteers, complete with sweat and blood. A charge was fitted into a fiberglass skull, covered in baked foam latex, and loaded with a blood squib. To sync the timing perfectly, they simply rigged a literal wire between the gun's trigger and the charge, and when the trigger was pulled, the squib would explode simultaneously. And you know the rest. The special effects are rad, but the moment is both emotionally and visually horrific. It's not just the gore, it's the dehumanization of our leading character, who hasn't even reached the halfway point of his suffering. Even after being turned into Swiss cheese worse than Jason Voorhees in the opening of Jason Goes to Hell, Murphy's still clinging to the last frayed thread of life. We see him airlifted to a hospital, experiencing everything through his POV, harsh hospital lights, flashes of the family he'll never see again, mixed with the twisted faces of his killers while they laugh at his pain. His body is mangled beyond belief, and we watch as the doctors try to bring him back with electric shocks before announcing his time of death. Doing so with the empathy of a McDonald's employee informing you that the ice cream machine is broken down. Again. After a moment of darkness, Murphy is then brought back to life. Not by loving hands or medical professionals trying to save him, but by cold tech heads hammering away on his remains like he's an Xbox 360 flashing the red ring of death on Christmas morning. They casually talk about amputating his other arm for aesthetic reasons, as if he were a goddamn rock'em sock'em robot. The story of his resurrection is told mostly through Murphy's vision, and it's intensely invasive. Everyone is uncomfortably close to his face, that drunk lady kisses his eye hole, and you just know Bob Morton's breath smells like that of a dead hooker.
I fucking love that guy!
Oh, and let's not forget the disgusting looking baby food paste that he has pumped into him to survive. It's physical, psychological, medical, and existential horror all wrapped into one. All this traumatic horror aside, there's some fun callbacks to the genre as well. Pay close attention to the scene where RoboCop finally becomes fully operational and marches through the police station with the other officers chasing after him. Between the music and the aura, it's straight out of a John Carpenter film. It's also awesome experiencing Robo unleash revenge on all the scum who have wronged him, ending with a showdown at another industrial hellhole. One slice of revenge cake stands out in particular: the eradication of Paul McCrane's Emil character. Aside from his facial hair placement being a horror film all in itself, Emil's death might be the gnarliest moment of all. As he attempts to hit RoboCop with a vehicle, Robo hits the B button spin move instead, and Emil crashes his van into a toxic waste container. Emil then emerges as a melting mutant with hot dog fingers. To pull this off, Rob Boutein's effects team gave McCrane layers of a foam latex headpiece and gloves to make him look like marshmallow sauce in mid-meltdown. They then replicated the prosthetics on a dummy, hit it with another car, and splattered raw chicken, soup, and gravy all over the set to complete the goo explosion. It's gross in all the best ways. The MPAA, of course, hated it. They wanted the scene cut, along with many others. Orion refused, however, saying the scene achieved the most laughs of any during their test screenings. Turns out audiences were always more than happy to see a laughing boy turned into a cake left out in the rain. Clarence's final stand was supposed to have more of a horror-driven aspect to it as well, with Verhoeven wanting RoboCop to stab Boddicker in the eye to finish him off. But even they knew that the MPAA would likely protest. Instead, RoboCop gives him the middle finger through the throat. The scene was edited in such a way that it doesn't actually show the penetration, but rather the action and after effect of the throat stabbing. While Verhoeven found a childlike glee and humor in all of the film's nastiness, the MPAA didn't agree. RoboCop was slapped with the dreaded X rating at least 8 times for the very awesome reasons that we've been celebrating today, and many more. The director argued that the violence was so over the top that it became comical, even saying that the X-rated cut made his kids laugh. But we're talking about the MPAA after all. If they were a human being, they'd be Jeremy Piven's fun-sucking cheese character from Old School. RoboCop would eventually receive its R rating and be unleashed onto the world, raking in around $54 million against its $13 million budget. It was also released during the dawn of home video, where a RoboCop VHS would cost you a whopping $89.98 to purchase for home viewing. And don't forget the toy sales that were so strong that they led to the studio effectively tanking their own franchise 2 films later by trying to market it towards children. Regardless, to this day, RoboCop and all of the bloodshed incorporated with his big screen debut are now cemented in pop culture legacy as a household name that we still can't get enough of. Robo finger sword things crossed that the upcoming Amazon Prime TV series gets away from the PG-13 nonsense and gives us back the true R-rated and sometimes horrific DNA of our favorite tin can. And that, my friends, is what the fuck happened to RoboCop. The 1987 sci-fi action classic RoboCop is one of those rare perfect movies. Everything about it works just right. The satire, the violence, the characters, the design of RoboCop himself. And it's difficult to follow up perfection, which is evident in RoboCop 2, a movie that tried to carry on the story, but ended up feeling tonally inconsistent and a bit scattered. It's a fun movie, but not on the level of its predecessor, which is why we're gonna dig in to just what happened to RoboCop 2. Orion Pictures had had a big hit on their hands with RoboCop when they released it on July 17, 1987. Made on a budget of just under $14 million, the film earned more than $53 million at the box office. So, of course, Orion wanted to replicate that success as quickly as possible. They hired RoboCop writers Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner to write a script for the sequel, and gave them the warning that there would be a financial penalty if they didn't turn the script in by the end of '87. Neumeier and Miner slapped together a rough draft and submitted it on January 1st, 1988. But the script wasn't even close to what Orion was hoping for. In fact, some have described it as incomprehensible. Titled RoboCop 2: The Corporate Wars, it would begin with RoboCop being blown apart with a cannon while stopping a bank robbery. Jump ahead 25 years, and Robo is being rebooted in a world where TV comedian Bixby Snyder, the "I'll buy that for $1" guy, has been elected president and is dealing with an entrepreneur who wants to buy out the US government. Privileged citizens live in the cities, being served by robots. The have-nots are exiled to shanty towns outside the city walls. Security officers work to push the outsiders away from the city perimeter, and the outsiders are starting to fight back. During all of this, RoboCop is used as a pawn, interacts with a scientist and a hacker, and is hooked into a computer system, where he finds a love interest. The story also involved a rapper from space called Moondog. This is going to need a lot of rewrites, and they couldn't be done by Neumeier and Miner, because the Writers Guild went on strike.
The overwhelming issue in the strike is residuals. Writers say the producers are offering what amounts to a reduction in their fees.
With non-union writers being needed, producer John Davison turned to the world of comic books. Watchmen and V for Vendetta creator Alan Moore declined the chance to work on RoboCop 2. So, The Dark Knight Returns and Sin City creator Frank Miller gladly took up the job. Over a series of drafts, Miller gave Orion something that they could work with, although his initial drafts were closer to what ended up being RoboCop 3 than what became RoboCop 2, with that troublesome company Omni Consumer Products forcing people out of their homes, all so they can bulldoze old Detroit and replace it with Delta City, the city of the future. RoboCop ends up siding with the resistance fighters against the OCP, befriending a little girl who's a computer whiz along the way. It all builds up to an all-out war between the locals and OCP. And that all got pushed back into Part 3. Waylon Green, who received an Oscar nomination for his work on the classic western The Wild Bunch, helped to shape the script into what RoboCop 2 ended up being. Then Miller was kept on board to continue working on revisions throughout production. In the first movie, OCP created RoboCop, building the cyborg around the remains of the murdered police officer Alex Murphy to eliminate crime, making Detroit safe for their Delta City construction workers. Now they have shifted strategies. They fund the police department and are purposely running it into the ground.
OCP cut our salaries 40% and canceled our pensions, and now they refuse to even talk to us.
They want crime to run rampant. So Detroit will become a bankrupt hellhole. Then they can buy it out and make their Delta City dreams come true. The plan is working well, especially since there's a highly addictive drug called Nuke on the streets. And this drug is so popular, there's even a Nuke cult headed up by a cold-blooded former hippie named Kane. At the same time, OCP is trying to make a sequel of their own, a second RoboCop. Trouble is, the new Robos, which are also made out of dead police officers, keep going mad and destroying themselves. So psychologist Juliet Fax figures violent criminals might be better candidates, as they would enjoy the power and virtual immortality of becoming a cyborg. So yes, Kane becomes RoboCop 2, as Fax believes that she can control him by simply supplying him with Nuke. She also messes with the original Robo's programming, leading to a humorous sequence where he's off his game for a while.
Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
He's dead, Murphy.
RoboCop director Paul Verhoeven was busy working on Total Recall at the time, so the first choice to direct RoboCop 2 was Repo Man's Alex Cox. But Cox took in a viewing of The Exorcist 2 while considering the offer, and decided that making sequels just wasn't for him. Next up was River's Edge director Tim Hunter. It was felt that he would bring a dark sensibility and realistic tone to the project, and he was attached to it for quite a while. In fact, most of the effects were designed under Hunter's supervision, but he had issues with the script, and dropped out just 11 weeks before filming was scheduled to begin. The replacement director needed to be someone who had experience working on high-profile films that required a lot of special effects, especially since RoboCop 2 would have more complicated effects than the first movie, and bigger effects sequences, including a battle between two cyborgs. So The Empire Strikes Back and Never Say Never Again director Irvin Kershner was brought in to do the job. The first thing that Kershner did was storyboard the major action scenes. When production began, he shot those first, sticking to the storyboards. Everything else on the production was looser, with Kershner often winging it and deciding how to direct scenes on location, with as little coverage as possible, because Orion wanted this movie to be done fast. Kershner didn't mind, as he told Cinefantastique, "I was a documentary cameraman and director for years. Everything you do is seat of the pants in documentaries, because you react to what is and what you find. To me, that's great fun. It's a harrowing experience at times, but I love the challenge." Kershner liked the material. He said that it gave him the chance to do a wry, satiric comment on life in our time, on what's happening to man. "I find that cyborg that is Robo is really a metaphor for people in our society. They're becoming roboticized without knowing it. They're so programmed. They're practically programmed like Robo is. They can be programmed to be reactive in a very clever way, or to be totally stupid and nuts. And we show that." Although it was a sequel to someone else's film, Kershner found a way to make it personal. And to keep on schedule, he would choose not to shoot scenes that were obviously destined to be cut. They had to trim the fat from the script. Unfortunately, some of what was trimmed would have added more emotional depth, like extra scenes involving Robo's memories of Alex Murphy's family, an element that is ditched very quickly in the finished film. RoboCop himself, Peter Weller, had read the Neumeier and Miner script and wasn't impressed. He passed on RoboCop 2. Orion didn't care whether he came back or not. As far as they were concerned, it's like the Mummy, just put anybody under the bandages. But after reading the new script, Weller decided to return to the role of Robo. He was reluctant but didn't feel that he had gotten closure with the character. For the sequel, he was given a new suit, with a cool iridescent look.
The colors are different, the surfaces are different, they're more reflective, they're harder, and it's all now fiberglass, like a brand new car.
And it allowed him to be more mobile. The arc of his character was the most challenging thing about the sequel. Weller said, "RoboCop starts off in the pursuit of certain people, and then he's programmed and he becomes almost comical. He becomes kind of sadly impotent.
I think we should talk."
And then he gets his life back, and he becomes pretty brutal. Several other actors returned from the first movie. Nancy Allen as RoboCop's partner Ann Lewis, Dan O'Harely and Felton Perry at OCP, Robert Dackey as Sergeant Warren Reed, Angie Bowling as Alex Murphy's widow Ellen, who really should have been given more to do in the movie, Mario Machado and Lisa Gibbons as the hosts of Media Break. Then we've got new additions that include Tom Noonan, who can always be counted on to give a creepy performance, as Kane himself. And we've got Gabriel Damon as the most controversial character, Kane's 13-year-old sidekick Hob. Critic Roger Ebert said that including this foul-mouthed, gun-toting kid in the film was beneath contempt.
It really disturbed me to see this little boy in this violent role.
Even while working on the movie, Weller still wasn't satisfied with the script. And never would be, as he felt that the sequel didn't have the code, the spine, or the soul of the first movie. He told the AV Club, RoboCop 2 didn't have a third act. I told the producers, and Irv Kershner and Frank Miller, I told them all, I said, where's the third act here, man? They said, no, the monster's going to be enough. I said, look, it's not enough. The monster was the 8-foot-tall Kane cyborg, otherwise known as RoboCop 2. The creative team was determined to make RoboCop's climactic battle with this beast extremely cool, so dazzling that viewers would be able to overlook any of the film's shortcomings. Because at least they got to watch a cyborg battle, right? And it is pretty impressive, featuring some great special effects that were overseen by Phil Tippett. Although Orion rushed RoboCop 2 as quickly as they couldn't reach the Christmas 1989 release that they had been hoping for. The movie wasn't ready to be sent out into the world until June 22, 1990, and it wasn't received as well as its predecessor was, making less money on a higher budget. Made for somewhere around 25 to 30 million, RoboCop 2 earned just under 46 million at the box office. Not a great success, and it took a beating from critics and viewers alike. As great as the special effects were, the story was underwhelming, and the tone was all over the place. It aimed at being funnier than the first movie, but mixed its goofier humor with some very dark and disturbing moments. It's a strange blend. RoboCop 2 ended up being the last feature film that Irvin Kershner ever directed, wrapping up a career that stretched back 40 years. It wasn't the best way to end, but not awful. The movie is entertaining and has its fans, and at the very least, it's much more popular with viewers than the next sequel would be. The RoboCop franchise has continued over the decades, mostly on TV and in comic books. In 2018, a movie called RoboCop Returns was announced, to be based on the original script that Neumeyer and Miner wrote for RoboCop 2. The project passed through the hands of directors Neil Blomkamp and Abe Forsyth. Weller was even interested in playing Robo again, if the money was right. But RoboCop Returns never made it into production. Still, we don't know if that script had any chance of working on the big screen. What we have is what Irvin Kershner, Frank Miller, and Waylon Green were able to come up with. And it's sadly not on the level of RoboCop. But I guess it's a fine RoboCop 2.
We're only human.
In 1987, Paul Verhoeven and Orion Pictures created a cutthroat, R-rated action sci-fi classic. And let's face it, one of the coolest movies ever made.
Drop the gun. You are under arrest.
A runaway train on fire destined to create a franchise audiences could not get enough of. The problem that shouldn't have been a problem is that it happened to sell a hell of a lot of toys.
RoboCop Cyberlab comes with all this.
So 6 years later, when it came time to create the third film in the franchise, Orion Pictures altered course, opting for a more family-friendly approach.
You won't believe this. He'll be loyal as a puppy.
They demanded that their newest sequel be more palatable to an audience that was buying the merchandise of their now household characters. Even included in a preemptive advertisement on the back of a RoboCop 2 Game Boy box that promises the next RoboCop adventures would be for all age groups. Ugh. It was a course that would jump that same train off the tracks, over the proverbial shark, and into the fiery pit of movie hell, stepping on the throat of the franchise theatrically for more than 20 years, causing one of the greatest comic book writers of all time to abandon Hollywood for over a decade, and essentially killing the directorial career of a talented up-and-coming cult horror filmmaker. Dead or alive, you're coming with me on this horrid journey of what happened to RoboCop 3.
Dead or alive, you're coming with me.
Just before the release of RoboCop 2, an apparently confident Orion Pictures greenlit not just one, but two more sequels. They again reached out to famed comic book creator and RoboCop 2 writer Frank Miller for writing duties. Miller accepted, hoping to finally be able to incorporate and expand on some of his ideas that had been kept out of RoboCop 2. Unfortunately, his work ended up being gutted so mightily that he left Hollywood and didn't return to work on a feature film again until 2005's Sin City.
What have you done?
Exactly what I had to.
Boom Studios were able to release a 9-part comic book series telling his intended story. The series, titled RoboCop Last Stand, retained Miller's satire-fueled ultra-violent vision, remaining more in line with Verhoeven's original. It features a different narrative structure and a more coherent story. There are deeper themes of corporate corruption and a more personal look into the existential crisis that Robo is fighting inside what's left of his mind. The comic series further explores RoboCop's relationship with Jill Hennessy's Dr. Mary Lazarus, as well as showing the far more ruthless nature of John Castle's villain, McDaggett. No spoilers here, but even the ending in the comic series is also far darker than what we received in this trilogy capper. And you're probably gonna hear this next line in a lot of today's video. It just didn't align with the family tone Orion Pictures were demanding. In a further kick to the Robo-Dick, Peter Weller wouldn't return for the sequel, as he was busy working with visionary director David Cronenberg on a film called Naked Lunch.
Oh my god. It smells like a tainted cheese.
Though you may have thought he had no interest in the project, after being unhappy with the way RoboCop 2 turned out, Weller originally met with Decker and wanted to return, which is surprising. The thought that the very particular actor was alright with the idea of his character awkwardly flying to the rescue on a jetpack in a film with a budget of a snack pack is surprising. And so, after American Ninja actor Michael Dudikoff passed on the role, actor Robert Burke took over as Alex Murphy in RoboCop 3.
Back off, or there will be trouble.
He also voiced him in the absurdly underrated RoboCop vs. the Terminator video game. Replacing Peter Weller as RoboCop is an impossible task, yet Burke gave it a hell of a run anyway. The film's faults definitely didn't rest on Burke's shoulders, like the 150-pound suit that he was forced to wear. While he was on set, it would constantly pinch and aggravate him. The poor guy was forced to wear a recycled suit from the first RoboCop that had been sized for Weller. You'll be happy to know that playing the titular character in the widely accepted worst film in the franchise didn't seem to have too negative of an impact on his career. The actor has gone on to have a more than successful resume, including everything from The Sopranos to Copland over the years that followed. Hired to direct this amalgamation of what once was? None other than Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps director Fred Decker. Sounds like a match made in heaven for a third RoboCop. Even now it seems like a movie that I'd see. Decker took the job happily, later lamenting that deep down he knew the story had been told to fruition long ago, which, in his hilarious words, made him boned from the get-go. Still, as a major fan of the first film, he says it was the most enjoyable movie-making experience that he ever had. While unfair, he takes full ownership for all of RoboCop 3's faults, saying that if the movie blows, there's nobody to blame but himself. You seldom hear that type of humility coming out of Hollywood. Makes you wish the film worked out better for him. Alas, Decker was facing the insurmountable task of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Or rather, an edgy R-rated couldn't give two fucks what anyone thinks franchise into PG-13 family fodder that could be proudly placed on the shelves of a KB toy store. Not that he had the budget for that either. Decker was forced to change Miller's script and make it fit the family-friendly tone Orion demanded. Unceremoniously watching RoboCop 3 unfold, you can almost hear the last gasping breath of Miller's once ambitious story being snuffed out.
I'm fine. And call me Murphy.
What we ended up with is a story where RoboCop, finally appearing after 20 minutes, takes up arms with a resistance group after OCP officers forcibly evict and endanger the lives of Detroit civilians, doing so to clear the path for a corporate-driven dystopian habitat called Delta City. Not to mention, they ho-hum unceremoniously murder his best friend and partner, Officer Lewis, played by a returning Nancy Allen. The story spends way too much time on an almost slapstick crew at the core of the Resistance, including a little girl who happens to be an expert hacker, and the overacted roles of the normally welcome Tales from the Crypt alums CCH Pounder and Stephen Root. Despite its shortcomings, there are spots in which you can sense the beating heart of RoboCop underneath it all. These moments mostly lie in the villains of the story. Rip Thorne as the CEO of OCP is, if nothing else, an entertaining casting choice, and the dark comedy surrounding the scumbags of the corporate world is on full display. Specifically, as we watch shareholder and employee reactions to OCP's stock plunging. For a movie they wanted to be family-friendly, there sure are a lot of people offing themselves in this thing. Bradley Whitford's Fleck is a great addition to the cast as another Class A American Psycho-level asshole with a hell of a send-off. McDaggett is a bad guy worthy of his own Bond film, and of course it's comforting to see franchise stalwart Felton Perry amongst them. The biggest missed opportunity of the entire thing, however, may have come in the form of Bruce Locke's Atomo character. The Kanemitsu Corporation and their leader, Kanemitsu, overseeing OCP's Detroit takeover, create a ninja android called an Atomo. They look cool as hell and make a series of memorable gnarly faces throughout. The problem though? That's all we see them do. They show up, kick RoboCop around for a moment, only to be dismantled in a single return of fire. as if RoboCop were fighting a malfunctioning Sega Dreamcast from a flea market. Decker knew this and tried to explain that he was a huge fan of Hong Kong action films at the time, such as those from Jackie Chan and John Woo. He wanted to emulate them, but was once again too hampered by the budget to find a stunt team able to accomplish what he had in mind. He'd later referenced the Matrix fighting styles as the type of thing that he had been hoping to accomplish. On the bright side, there's also a cool moment where Frankenhooker's James Lorenz shows up as a wisecracking jerk weirdo who gets murdered by the splatterpunks.
Hey, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't even be here, you dumb broad.
It's a win for horror fans to see the Night of the Creeps director basically high-fiving Frank Henenlotter in a RoboCop film. But that's just my 2 cents. The 14-week Atlanta production of RoboCop 3 wrapped up in May of 1991, but wouldn't be seen on a big screen in North America until November of 1993. Orion Pictures had been dealing with bankruptcy at the time, but Columbia TriStar Entertainment owned the international distribution rights. This led to a finished work print of the film making its way to several countries ahead of America. And this all led to pirated VHS copies of RoboCop 3 making their way through the streets of New York City like they were Nuki. Also contributing to a land of spoilers was the tie-in self-titled video game. It was released ahead of the film due to Orion's bankruptcy issues, and featured several story points. The game featured a jetpack RoboCop shooting his way through a skyscraper on its super badass cover. Unfortunately, the game itself was not super badass. Neither was the reaction to the film. Today, RoboCop 3 sits at a current score of 15% for the audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the critical consensus saying that it should literally be placed under arrest. On the bright side, and in a hat tip to Decker's fascination with Hong Kong-style action, RoboCop 3 opened up at #1 in Japan on its opening weekend. It also managed to do so in France. In America, however, the film opened the same week as Look Who's Talking Now, in a month entirely dominated by Jurassic Park. The film, with a budget of $22 million, came in 3rd place on its opening weekend, grossing just over $4 million. RoboCop 3, which bent over backwards to be palatable for all ages, ended its domestic run with a paltry $10.6 million at home. After all this, the total haul for Robo ended at a worldwide total of $47 million, killing the franchise theatrically until its unwelcome PG-13 remake arrived more than 20 years later.
Take this off me now.
You need to relax.
I need to get out of this thing. What did you do to me? What have you done to me?
And the franchise has remained theatrically dead since. Good lord, why does this read like a title card at the end of a footage film? It's not all bad. Though no theatrical plans are currently in place, a badass video game by the name of RoboCop Rogue City piqued Amazon MGM's interest after purchasing the franchise rights in 2022. The game, a midquel taking place between RoboCop 2 and 3, featured the return of Peter Weller to the titular role.
Any warnings to the bad guys?
It seems there will be trouble.
And all this has Amazon considering a RoboCop TV series that would bring the actor back once more. Weller chimed in, saying during the most recent Saturn Awards that it could happen, and he could return in some role if the stars align. Nancy Allen was also asked about returning, to which she replied she'd need to see a script first, ruminating on the last 2 attempts to revive the character, not to mention she's, dead. But this is RoboCop after all, and we are in the age of requels. Though the storyline sounds like something more of a remake, the current synopsis is a giant tech conglomerate collaborating with the local police department to introduce a technology-advanced enforcer to combat rising crime. If they do decide to officially dust off RoboCop for a TV series, the team behind it is a formidable one that includes both James Wan's Atomic Monster production company and the experienced showrunner Peter Ocko. Studios are going to studio. They're never going to stop looking at franchise IP and wondering, can you fly, Bobby?
Can you fly, Bobby?
We here at JoBlo hope it does because we'll always be fans of RoboCop, even when it's not pretty. And that is what happened to RoboCop 3.
My friends call me Murphy. You call me RoboCop.
What do you do when you've just tanked your hit franchise by turning an R-rated movie world made for adults into a wacky kids flick? who, by the way, were already into it as it was.
I think it's going rather well, don't you, sir?
Well, obviously, you're going to take the same franchise and turn it into a TV show also intended for family audiences. Then you're going to air it at night when kids are not watching.
There's a new guy in town. His name's RoboCop.
If you've ever wondered what RoboCop would look like as a TV show that kept the aesthetics and even some of the satire, but replaced the interior with more of a Power Rangers vibe, well, we've got over 16 hours of it to talk about, and every one of them is available on Tubi right now. So here's the story of how they got there. This is what happened to the RoboCop TV series.
This is your final warning. Disperse.
After the aforementioned unfortunate situation that was RoboCop 3, amongst other poor investments, Orion Pictures were in dire financial straits. This required them to go after a quick influx of cash that included selling the TV rights to RoboCop. The rights were sold to Canadian company Skyvision Entertainment in May of 1993. Their plans involved taking popular movie IP and expanding it into TV movies and shows. They would later do the same with Universal Soldier, creating a pair of hauntingly atrocious television films starring Gary Busey and Burt Reynolds. Ugh. Skyvision handed Orion Pictures $500,000 for the rights and went on to create 22 40-minute episodes and a pilot over an hour and a half long. The pilot, titled The Future of Law Enforcement, had a budget of $5 million, while each following episode carried a price tag of an average of around $1.2 million each. Each of these episodes would take an average of 8 days to film in Toronto and Ontario, where they recreated the streets of old Detroit and the OCP headquarters. The result is a very awkward yet intriguing situation to take in. For insight into the studio's headspace, look no further than executive producer Stephen Downing. Downing had previously produced the very successful MacGyver television show and saw RoboCop as the same kind of character, which I mean, he's not at all, but it worked for the studio, who wanted a product that they could air on television, but not just any television, family television, not late night HBO or even Skinamax. They were going to have to tone it down one way or another. So, where MacGyver would use his wit to escape a tough situation, RoboCop would have to use his to do the same, without killing anyone ever. Rather than shooting gigantic holes in bad guys with the hilariously large and awesome gun that lives in his leg, he now used the gun for things other than mere bullets. It now had various settings that would fire things like tracing equipment, explodable hockey pucks, and inflatables to either trap bad guys in their environments or stop them from escaping through a doorway. He'd still fire bullets from time to time, but only at other weapons or inanimate objects. It's mostly just as silly as it sounds, but the show's budget did provide for some pretty sweet action moments regardless. Multiple sequences throughout feature impressive car chases, explosions, and special effects. Sure, the computer effects are hilariously outdated today, but the old-school action technique rings true. The dialogue was often silly or corny, especially when it came to the Batman Forever-like villains. But still, when it came to the looks, sounds, and feel of the RoboCop world Verhoeven and company had created, the production understood the assignment in more ways than perhaps given credit for. One thing that is very nice about the show is that they managed to keep a surprising amount of Verhoeven's aesthetics, such as his vision dashboard and the analog lines through it, or the way the mechanics of it worked. It also featured some futuristic upgrades, such as a built-in lie detector that lets him know if someone is on the up and up based on the stress levels in their voice. Each episode would start out with the newscasters promising us that, "You give us 3 minutes, we give you the world," followed by some, at times, pretty funny satirical content that would often tie into that night's episode. It's far tamer than the R-rated versions it's born of, but it's still somewhat endearing. It's as if you were to play a kid's version of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, scrubbed of any unpleasantries. That's not exactly what you want, but it provides some interesting nostalgia. That's not to say that the show was only geared towards children. There are some adult themes at play here under the surface. Storylines about cultist church groups, corporate greed, and more. In the pilot episode, a couple of corporate douchebags meet up to sexercise, an act in which they simply work out feverishly in sexual attire, and the camera places itself subjectively to make it look like they're doing it. There's almost no violence or sex in the show, but the RoboCop TV series is far more The Sandlot than it is the Buttercream Gang. The pilot, directed by seasoned TV vet Paul Lynch, with various directors following him after, lets you know exactly what you're in for. The script was adapted from an unused RoboCop 2 script by RoboCop writers Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner, originally titled RoboCop 2: The Corporate Wars. It was a very rough, quickly thrown together script halted by a writer's strike and therefore never touched up. In the screenplay, RoboCop kills a handful of bad guys amidst a large display of neon Christmas decorations. Afterwards, one of them, named Weasel, manages to fire a cannon at RoboCop, blowing him to smithereens. This takes him offline for 25 years, when he's awoken to a future with android prostitutes. Obviously, they don't use that here, but they do use trickery to blow Robo up with a large weapon, taking him offline and out of the pilot for a bummer chunk of its running time. The series takes place a few years after the original, and for the most part ignores RoboCop 2 and 3. The show only had the rights to Alex Murphy, so they basically just renamed everyone else. Robo still has his female partner, this time played by Yvette Nipar as Officer Lisa Madigan, as well as his police sergeant, now called Stanley Parks, and played by Blue Mankuma. It's the kind of legal sidestepping that the Friday the 13th franchise probably could have used during their rights issues. The same maneuvering takes place with everyone from the now less evil and more naive CEO of Omnicorp to Murphy's wife and son. The music and iconic theme song are even mostly the same, with slight variations here and there. The villains are where the series truly jumps the proverbial shark, many of which show up in the pilot and end up as recurring characters. Starting with Pudface Morgan, played by James Kidney, a disfigured bad guy who blames RoboCop for a horrific disfigurement that left him looking like one Minecraft commoner after a barbecue accident, based on the disfigured character of Emil from the original film. He's pretty hokey and seems more like a character out of Erie, Indiana or Goosebumps than the Robo universe. Then there's the mad genius villain Dr. Millardo, played excitedly by Cliff DeYoung. The paranoid psychopath with a 210 IQ has his moments where he's entertaining in a Jim Carrey Riddler sort of way, but it's often so annoying. There are more villains throughout, but they all come across as sort of a Rita Repulsa type. They'll hatch a new plan to take over Delta City or Old Detroit, and RoboCop will show up and bonk them on the head. Everyone learns a lesson. Speaking of Power Rangers comparisons, the show even has its own Zordon. Andrea Roth plays Diana Powers, an OCP secretary who is murdered in the pilot episode by Dr. Millardo so that he can use her brain for an AI meant to run Delta City. He succeeds in part. She's now a woman in the machine, but Robo saves her digital imprint and she ends up as a recurring hologram friend, helping him out with any cyber issues, much like the relationship between Halo's Master Chief and Cortana. It's kind of silly and awful, but again, can be endearing in the right spots. The studio continued to reach out to a younger demographic by, again, recruiting kid actors into major roles. First, there's 8 or 9-year-old character of Gadget, played by Sarah Campbell. She's a ward of the state who hangs around the police station as a mascot of sorts, before she's eventually adopted by the less screamy and more kind-hearted Sergeant Parks. Then there's RoboCop's own son, Jimmy, played by Jordan Hughes. And of course RoboCop's wife Nancy, played by Jennifer Griffin. His wife and son again think Alex Murphy was killed in action and don't know that he's RoboCop. He chooses to protect them from afar without letting them know the dark truth. The writing gives him plenty of opportunities, whether Jimmy's being recruited into an old gang or finding out that his wife and son are living off welfare. The studio had hoped that they could arrange an agreement with original RoboCop actor Peter Weller, but for unknown reasons, likely money, a deal could not be reached. They then asked RoboCop 3's Robert Burke, who actually declined as well. The studio held auditions and came across daytime Emmy-winning actor Richard Eden. Eden actually did an admirable job with the voice of RoboCop, and though sometimes a bit clunky, even the movements. But if we're being honest, his face was a fucking nightmare under the helmet. Handsome guy and all, but the makeup effects were haunting. Eden was given Weller's RoboCop 2 suit to film in, with a few minor alterations to make it fit. That suit ended up at almost 100 pounds to wear after the alterations. But on the bright side, the new gun was lighter and easier to maneuver, so there was that at least. And RoboCop was given a badass Ford Mustang to drive around the Canadian streets of Detroit to replace the classic Ford Taurus model. Throughout the episodes, you'll see Robo deal with some pretty interesting situations. The second episode features a group of nutbag religious televangelists trying to take him out, leading to him being framed for their hot tub murder. Another episode has him teaming with his retired police captain father to stop a nuclear war. There's even some nice Verhoevenisms, with a few episodes that poke fun at how insane consumerism had become. Such as an episode where RoboCop has to prove a man innocent before he executes himself on a live TV game show. But perhaps no moment is more memorable than in episode 14, RoboCop vs. Commander Cash. Rowdy Piper, of all people, plays a psychopath who believes he is the superhero Commander Cash. He takes on the persona and the ridiculous suit, as well as his sayings about cartoon law, using them to incite children to riot and steal toys from toy stores. He ends up teaming with RoboCop in a most entertaining episode that also speaks to the way consumerism was used as a weapon against kids in the material 90s. If that doesn't scream RoboCop, I don't know what the fuck does. The series had its own unique intro that felt something like one of the 90s Star Trek episodes, leading into a Law and Order-like title introduction when the lesson was learned and the bad guy was taken into custody. The ending of later episodes featured a power ballad by Joe Walsh and Lita Ford titled A Future to This Life. This, along with snippets from the awful music video that featured RoboCop staring at them confused. An action figure set was of course released by a company called Toy Island. The set had everything from a field ambulance to a cryo chamber playset, and featured G.I. Joe-sized miniature characters from the show. Later, they released a Power Glove series that featured some pretty sweet packaging. All of this may be a danger to your wallet should you dare to venture to eBay to check it out yourself. The show very clearly was quite ambitious and had good intentions, but they also never had much of a sense of who in the hell they were marketing to. The highlights of the show was everything wrought from the original two films. From the awesome cyberpunk aesthetic to the music and the cheeky corporate media satire. The lowlights came when they attempted to turn the show into Full House or Family Matters. The ratings and reviews were terrible, and the show only lasted the one season, despite the production hoping to continue for another. Though the show has had a myriad of hard-to-find and confusing physical media releases, including a release of the pilot episode as RoboCop 4 Law & Order, the good news is that you can find the entire run in pretty decent quality on both Amazon Prime and Tubi currently. And sure, it's not up to snuff for what the franchise could have been, but when it comes to a wholesome, sometimes badass nostalgia, you could do worse if sick in bed on a long flight or cleaning the house. It's something worth checking out for Super RoboCop fans. And that, my friends, is what happened to the RoboCop TV series.
Until we meet again.
I know a lot of us, both the creators on this channel as well as our audience, got to see a ton of stuff that they were not supposed to see at younger ages. I sure as hell wasn't supposed to see Species in theaters as a 10-year-old, but here we are. Thanks, Mom. Where it got really interesting, really outside of the box thinking, was when someone decided to take those not made for kids properties and make them for kids. Rambo, Toxic Avenger, We'll See You Soon, Buddy, Swamp Thing, Starship Troopers, and yes, RoboCop were somehow inexplicably turned into children's cartoon shows. Let's fire up Detroit's finest for not one, but two attempts at making one of the 80s most violent and inappropriate properties into Saturday morning cartoons and see what happened to these RoboCop shows. Kids' cartoons have been big forever. Now we have streaming services that either premiere new ones or just show entire seasons of ones that already aired, but for a long time it was either movie theater shorts or specific time blocks, most famously of the Saturday morning variety. Saturday mornings could have a whole block because there was no school to take their viewership away from the TVs, and they could get more ad revenue with more shows. The kidization of adult properties started with Rambo, which decided not to take the bleak PTSD of the first movie, but instead the action-packed fighting of the second movie and make it into a G.I. Joe-like property called Rambo: The Force of Freedom in 1986. A little while later, we would get a second stab at this, specifically with his little data thing that comes out of his hand, when RoboCop, maybe one of the least friendly kid properties, would be made into a cartoon show called, well, RoboCop. This is actually hilarious on two fronts, as one, the movie had to be toned down several times to avoid an X rating, great for kids, and the fact that marketing and advertising was a big satirical part of the movie, and here they were making a cash-in cartoon on that very thing.
The situation is now under control.
RoboCop was produced by Marvel of all things, with help from Orion Pictures, who was responsible for the movie as well. The show was actually part of this weird block of TV called the Marvel Action Universe, which included RoboCop, Dino Riders, and the pilot episode of what would eventually become the beloved X-Men 90s TV series. It would also fill out its time by running older series from earlier in the decade like Dungeons & Dragons, The Incredible Hulk, and Spider-Man, among others. This block, like the cartoons we're discussing today, didn't last long though, only running from 1988 to 1991. RoboCop would only end up being 12 episodes, even though it was commissioned for 13. That 13th episode was scrapped and turned into the pilot X-Men TV show, and even if that didn't come to fruition right away, it became the one we all know and love with the absolute banger of a theme song. That also gave us the sequel series recently that you should absolutely go watch. RoboCop the animated series takes place in a bizarro alternate universe. It still follows Alex Murphy, who was badly damaged by a gang and turned into RoboCop. RoboCop has the same captain and partner in Ann Lewis, is a product of OCP and deals with other attempts at peacekeeping.
Attention! Do not panic! Normal traffic will soon be restored.
The OCP is run by the Old Man, and RoboCop operates in the city of Old Detroit. What changed, what had to change really, are that the guns were turned into laser weapons, the violence on humans was way toned down and supplemented with a huge influx of robots, and it follows a kid TV show format. Oh, and Clarence Boddicker didn't die and actually comes back in the series finale that we never get a resolution on, but no big deal. RoboCop also moves a bit faster and has the ability to be more coordinated with his flow, and even has a red eye that moves across his visor to tie into the much more sci-fi theme. The show follows your typical message episodes with stuff like racism towards actual races, but also anti-robot sentiments.
Let OCP know we want their robots off the streets.
PTSD, classism, environmental danger, terrorism, and even workplace prejudice. The show looks like an 80s cartoon, but I feel it leans more towards real Ghostbusters than G.I. Joe in looks, if that makes sense. The voice cast includes Robert Boxsteele as RoboCop, Susan Roman as Lewis, and Harvey Atkin as a couple other voices amongst a few other voice actors. Atkin may be the most famous, at least for a certain generation, as he also voiced Bowser in multiple Mario Bros. Cartoons. The creative team was spearheaded by Rich Fogel, who helped write for shows like DuckTales, Muppet Babies, and The New Adventures of Batman, amongst others. While the show only lasted 12 episodes, it's actually pretty fun. It's slightly more mature than your typical kids show, but it's still very much aimed at a younger audience. It has some good callbacks to the movie, and while it doesn't have any of the voice cast from the original film, it has the feel of an amalgamation of children's TV and RoboCop. The animation is solid, and it's a perfectly acceptable version of our favorite Detroit police officer. The villains range from bad guy humans to other robots made by the same guy that made Ed 209, with the aforementioned Clarence Boddicker coming back in what would end up being the final episode, along with 3 new cop action heroes to help fight crime.
Ace Jackson, Wheels Wilson, Third Man Barnes.
This, of course, would lead to Kenner action figures, which was almost assuredly more profitable than the TV series, and unfortunately, that series has never been made into physical media stateside, with only a couple UK releases. While it was a Marvel animation production, don't expect it to show up on Disney Plus anytime soon. It is, however, very free on YouTube, even if the quality isn't anything to shout about. It's worth checking out as a forgotten piece of history and for robo-completionists everywhere.
You are all under arrest.
Just 10 years later, we would get a very different version of RoboCop with RoboCop Alpha Command. This also ran only one season, but instead of 12 episodes, we were gifted, and I use the term loosely, with 40 episodes. This is a very different type of show, and unfortunately, I don't mean that for the better. While the 88 version felt very much of its time in terms of animation and style in a good way, this is the Street Sharks or Mutant League of the Orion RoboCop universe, even failing to match the enjoyment of some of the lesser video games. Also, I didn't mean to use Street Sharks as a pejorative. Those toys rule. RoboCop Alpha Commando was developed by Eric and Julia Lewland, who also had their hand in all-time classics like X-Men the Animated Series, The Tick, Chip and Dale, Exo Squad, God I miss Exo Squad, and even lesser stuff that's still fun like Mummies Alive. This time it was in conjunction with MGM Animation Studios and something called Fireworks Entertainment. Cartoon shows in the 90s were big business, and even if you had a miss like this show, you could just as easily come up with a massive hit like, well, just about every other show I listed that they worked on before this. The show takes place after the movies in the year 2030, where RoboCop has been reactivated after a 5-year hiatus to help a government agency called Alpha Division with their Cobra-ass enemies called DARK, which is the Directorate for Anarchy, Revenge, and Chaos, which sounds like it should be led by Dr. Evil himself, if we're being honest. These adventures take Robo not only all over the country, but also all over the world to help stop any dark plots that arise. RoboCop is voiced by David Sobolov, who may be most famous for the mid-2010s voice of Drax in several Marvel animation projects, and the other voice actor of note is Dean Haglund as the hippie sandal-wearing Dr. Niemer, who activates and upgrades RoboCop for his missions. Dean has showed up in a ton of stuff, including other voice work, but come on, he's also in The Lone Gunman and The X-Files, so that's super cool. Out is Ann Lewis, and in is Agent Nancy Minor, who is voiced by Akio Morrison. The show has its issues. I can deal with the animation style and voices that don't always land, as well as the subject matter of the episodes that are very of its time. It's the inconsistencies that take me out of it. There's no explanation of what happened to Ann Lewis, nor why RoboCop was decommissioned. The timeline jumps from 2020 to 2030 after the first episode, and at first RoboCop's son is in a flashback, but then he just shows up at the same age as the flashback, while he and his mom have different names from the movie? While that's later explained, it also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. While I understand the need for changes, heck, we're going to talk about Toxic Crusaders soon, and RoboCop is right on the top of the pile for grade A violence that needed to be changed, you can also change too much. They almost take the fun out of RoboCop. Some of the less egregious things done to the character are the fact that this is the only time on screen we don't get a human face Murphy sans his helmet, and it takes him out of Detroit. Two of the most endearing things about RoboCop are the fact that every now and then we get to see him as kind of a human when his mask is removed, and that he is the protector of a specific city, even getting a statue in real life. The biggest issue, however, is how the character is written. You can have different people portray RoboCop, but he still needs to be RoboCop. Not only is he a go-go gadget kid's toy with all the extra tools and weapons that don't suit him, but he's also kind of a shitbag. As soon as he asked the doctor who the babe was,
Hello, Dr. Newmeyer. Who's the babe?
I knew we were in trouble. He has really cool, and that's in quotes, humor, and dialogue that make me want to watch RoboCop 3 to get a better version of this hero as a kid's property. Did I watch all 40 episodes? No. I watched enough to get a good idea of the show and even bounced around a bit to see how it evolved. And it really doesn't. That show also received its own toy line, which makes a lot more sense than the show from the late 80s, but even the toys weren't as good. If you're interested in an animated version of Detroit's finest cyborg cop, then watch the 12-episode run that's free on YouTube. I mean, this is also free on YouTube, but that one's better. If you need to explore more, then there are plenty of wonderful comic books and not so wonderful but still fun video games to take on. There's a reason these aren't available on any physical media or paid streaming service. Stay clear of them or there will be trouble.
Come quietly or there will be trouble.
In 1987, director Paul Verhoeven created the perfect movie, an R-rated, hilarious, and action-packed film with something to say about the world around it.
I'd buy that for $1.
And hell, it even sold toys. You'd have never guessed that the inevitable franchise would spawn only 2 follow-up films before being put to rest by 1993's disastrous third entry.
I am now authorized to be loyal as a puppy.
Fast forward to 2014, and a time when Hollywood's prime directive is to remake and reboot nostalgic IP, often to the considerable dismay of at least some of their respective fan groups. To their credit, however, Sony Pictures hired a visionary and fearless director perfect for upsetting the status quo, much like Verhoeven had done more than 30 years earlier. They hired an all-star cast and spared no expense, recreating the world of RoboCop. But studios are gonna studio. They followed up these great choices by failing to learn from any of the lessons that RoboCop 3 provided. They caged that same director's artistic freedom, demanding that he deliver a family-friendly PG-13 film, and completely took away the essence of the character that they'd promised to bring back to life.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
Though the director would fight through it all and make a somewhat competent film, this resurrection would prove far more Pet Sematary than RoboCop. In that it came back from the dead unnatural, not that it resembles the same plot. Anyway, this is the story of what happened to RoboCop 2014.
What did you do to me? What have you done to me?
The announcement of a RoboCop reboot came from Sony's Screen Gems back in 2005. 3 years later, after MGM announced that they were also looking to revive the property, celebrated director Darren Aronofsky was announced at San Diego Comic-Con as the film's director. It would be written by The Haunting and 13 Days writer David Self. Aronofsky was a clear indication that they were on the right track. An artistic director unafraid to be brash. He would no doubt make bold choices with his commentary. Here's where things began to go off the rails. For reasons we'll never fully know, Aronofsky and the entire creative team were no longer involved in the remake by 2011. It likely had something to do with the studio's financial troubles at the time. However, there were also rumors of creative differences, both in Aronofsky's understandable desire for an R-rated cut, as well as his alleged refusal to make RoboCop in 3D after an MGM studio exec was wowed by their Avatar theater experience and requested that RoboCop recreate it. Sounds like something Ari Gold would have to deal with in Entourage, and I totally believe it's true.
Really? Really?
Meanwhile, director Jose Padilla, after the success of his Brazilian crime epics Elite Squad and Elite Squad: The Enemy Within, was being courted by Sony. According to Jose, the studio pitched him several films, but none appealed to him. He saw a RoboCop poster in the room and asked if they owned it. When they confirmed that they did, he said, "That's the film I want to make," and they obliged. And it made perfect sense. Anyone who had seen the Elite Squad films and the way the sprawling action movies entertained, while also exploring the relationship between law enforcement and politics, knew that this was a match made in heaven. If you take nothing else from this video, check out the Elite Squad films. RoboCop fans should love them. With the perfect director on board, the script was to be handled by Joshua Zedamer, who at the time had exactly 0 finished writing credits. To be fair, he had done uncredited rewrites on Quantum of Solace and had written an unused screenplay of Frank Herbert's Dune novel, as well as an unmade 4th Jason Bourne film. Still, it seemed like an odd choice for such a high-profile project. Zedamer would take a far more serious approach to Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner's 1987 script. The action here takes place in 2028, and begins with a story about drone and robot usage overseas, rather than remaining confined to Detroit. Omnicorp desires to bring their technology to America, where a bureaucratic fight is happening over the topic. The script tackles themes of humanity and government, but the satire and comedy are mostly all gone. save for a performance from Samuel L. Jackson in a role originally offered to Sean Penn as an over-the-top, agenda-pushing news anchor. The film also focuses on a more cyberpunk version of RoboCop, rather than our gritty clunk of lovable metal from the 80s. One of the biggest issues is the lack of actual RoboCop action. The story feels like a long and tragic build to an underwhelming ending set piece. Aside from a short montage, we don't get to experience much of RoboCop cleaning up the streets. It instead focuses on the drama of Alex Murphy being separated from his wife and son by a greedy company with loose morals. While that's heartbreaking and it's well written at times, it doesn't exactly understand the assignment, as the kids say. As for casting the new, more emotional RoboCop, you might say the studio had some delusions of grandeur, with names like Tom Cruise, Johnny Depp, and Keanu Reeves being floated for the role. Later, Michael Fassbender and Russell Crowe were also considered, but the studio ultimately chose Joel Kinnaman. Kinnaman had gained recognition for his role in AMC's The Killing, and Jose believed that he had the right mix of toughness and vulnerability. House MD actor Hugh Laurie rejected the role of Omnicorp CEO, and at one point, Clive Owen was being considered. That role ended up in the very capable hands of the great Michael Keaton, who delivers a good performance as always. However, his portrayal has a dead serious earnestness that starkly contrasts with the over-the-top, cocaine-fueled depravity of previous business overlords in the franchise. But hey, it's Michael Keaton. Still worked. Some of the other Omnicorp workers were less entertaining, such as the weirdly casted Jay Baruchel, who plays an Omnicorp exec and randomly drops awkward lines like this one.
I mean, we created a hero. What happens when he opens his mouth?
Esteemed actor Gary Oldman was cast as the morally conflicted Dr. Norton. Ironically enough, after actual Edward Norton turned the role down. But this rounded out this cast of heavyweight talent, though Oldman wasn't exactly singing the film's praises, admitting that he took the project for money and was at the mercy of what the industry is making. However, he did acknowledge his admiration for the intelligence of the script and Jose's direction. Keaton echoed this sentiment, stating that the main reason he signed on was to work with Jose, as did most of the cast. Abby Cornish was cast as Murphy's distraught wife Clara, in a role that Kate Mara, Jessica Alba, Kerry Russell, and Rebecca Hall had all auditioned for or turned down. Jackie Earle Haley joined the cast as a character named Rick, who works with robots and humans, but has an inexplicable hatred for those who are a mix of both. His hatred for RoboCop is so irrationally over the top that one has to wonder if there's not a deleted scene of RoboCop sleeping with his wife on the special features menu. There's gotta be something. RoboCop was mostly filmed in Toronto and Vancouver during a hot summer. So hot, in fact, that Kinnaman claimed to have lost 20 pounds in the first week of filming due to the heat and discomfort inside the suit. And Kinnaman wasn't the only one troubled by the new suit. When the first leaked set photos and official promo shots of the suit surfaced in 2012, they were met with overwhelming negativity. Instead of the beloved, clunky, but still cool RoboCop design of the 80s, Robo now wore a thinner, shinier, and black version of what once was, and fans revolted, complaining that it looked like any other Batman or Iron Man type armor, and that it was generic and lacked the personality of what came before. Even Kinnaman admitted that he didn't get the suit at first, saying he had to quell all of his instincts over the course of filming. Specifically, why the suit was so different from the original. RoboCop 2014 was off to a bad start in the public eye. Gone was the original look and gritty street feel of the original. The city felt sleeker, and Robo's mechanics and databases were far more cyberpunk than anything that had come before. Everything just felt different. The suit, the special effects, and the characters weren't bad by any means. It just didn't feel like RoboCop. Even with the small hints of the original title track hidden within Pedro Bromfman's score, who, by the way, achieved his sound by blending the sounds of both acoustic and electric instruments to symbolize Murphy's transformation, which is extremely thoughtful and kinda cool. Effects supervisor Jamie Price had quite the daunting task ahead of him on the visual side of things. They tackled the responsibility by farming out different effect shots to various companies, from the cool and futuristic set of the Novak element to a guitarist with synthetic hands. Different companies handled different effect shots for the film. Price also noted that working with Jose was a unique challenge because the director, a documentary filmmaker at heart, was concerned about visual effects distracting from the film. As a result, much of it was shot handheld to allow more freedom for Jose and the actors, rather than using many Steadicams or cranes. For the Ed 209 scenes, the filmmakers wanted to honor what had come before, while incorporating realistic motion for today. Though CGI was used, they did have a physical wireframe version of the Ed 209 on set that they could physically move around before cutting it out in post and replacing it with a CGI version. For the new M208s, human stunt actors wearing suits covered in tracking markers were used on set before being digitized in post. As the budget and the special effects ballooned, so did the calls for the film to be PG-13. This was undoubtedly one of the most damaging decisions of all, a sentiment of which both Kinnaman and Jose agreed. In fact, during one of Kinnaman's first interviews after landing the role, he said, "Of course it's going to be R-rated. Only an idiot would make a PG-13 RoboCop film." Before waking up the next day to 47 missed calls from the studio. They also kept close tabs on Jose, making sure that he was delivering the desired family-friendly-ish entertainment. This became so frustrating for Jose that he phoned a director friend of his and vented that the project had been pure suffering. He said that for every 10 ideas he had, 9 of them were cut, and that he'd never want to work on the production this size again. The contents of the conversation were unintentionally leaked to the press by his friend before they even had finished filming, which naturally caused further strain between Jose and the studio. RoboCop was finally released upon the world in February of 2014, coming in third place on its own opening weekend, behind George Clooney's Monuments Men and the Lego Movie. The ultimate haul for this flick, with a budget of around $130 million, wasn't so bad on paper, as it pulled in over $242 million worldwide. But it hadn't blown the minds, arms, or legs off of anyone either. Surprisingly, the critics' reaction to Robo and his new look were rather tame. The film sits at a 50% rotten rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a website that you may never take seriously again when you learn that its score is nearly double the rating of RoboCop 2, which sits at a mere 28% rotten, which, to put eloquently, is total horseshit. Sony saved a little face by saying that they were working on a sequel in 2015, but predictably that never came to fruition. As years have gone by, some folks have opened up a little bit more about their experience on the film. Kinnaman admitted that Verhoeven's satire had been too ingrained in fans' expectations for them to steer so far away from it. He's also right in saying that the film would have been so much better received had it not been named RoboCop. Jose later lamented that he didn't have any creative freedom and echoed his friend's earlier statements that he spent 90% of his time on the film simply fighting the studio. Because of this, he'd have to think long and hard about ever doing a production of this size again. Verhoeven himself gave his critiques of the film, stating that the character had become too tragic in the remake. While in the original, there's a moment or two where Murphy will go home or have a flashback that brings him pain, he's mostly unaware of the weight of his own human tragedy. Here, I agree, but the film becomes far too depressing and bleak for its audience to be able to experience the entertainment that the first film provided, and is still providing today. And that, my friends, is what happened to RoboCop 2014.
Well, here we are. We've talked about nearly everything to do with everyone's favorite half-man, half-robot cop who strives to protect Detroit. I say almost because in 2023 we finally got the most ambitious video game project based on the character. This isn't just him appearing in Mortal Kombat as a playable character or a cash-in with the movies on every computer and console of the time. This is different. This is a labor of love from a company that made one of the worst licensed games of all time, as well as one of the best. It snuck out of nowhere while trying to pay respects to the source material, and also bringing new things to the table that feel like they could have been cut out of the first two movies. Let's take a look at the prime directives of this true sequel to RoboCop 2 and find out what happened to RoboCop Rogue City.
Don't adjust your television sets. Your regularly scheduled program will be back shortly.
It took 3 years to develop, and the team watched the first 3 movies multiple times to get things right. How did they do? Let's look at how well they followed the prime directives. Prime Directive 1. Does this look like RoboCop? The game captures what old Detroit looks like in the movies perfectly. While there are probably nicer parts of the city out there, the gameplay takes you from the police station to the crime-ridden parts of the city and to the OCP building, which all look right out of the film. This is a testament to how much the team paid attention to while watching the movies and is crucial in making a good game out of the IP. The police station, OCP building, and an area that is a wonderful callback look exactly as they should, while the city feels very generic compared to these locations. There are advertisements and movie posters that feel right in line with the universe. The computer tech even walks a fine line between being futuristic, where the franchise takes place, but also right out of the late 80s where the movies were made. Looking further into the details, we have glorious inclusions like RoboCop's vision being right out of the films when he takes aim at criminals. The green haze and movement boxes all look perfect, and Robo's sidearm nails both the muzzle flare when shooting and replicates the reloading action, body damage when hit, and intimidation factor of looking unstoppable with its power. The final piece to the visual puzzle, and one that was a non-negotiable, was how RoboCop would look. While several characters appear nearly identical as their film counterparts, including the Old Man, Murphy's partner Lewis, and Sergeant Reed, RoboCop is perfect here. With his mask on, he looks exactly how he should and even takes damage like he does in the films. When he sits in his chair in the police station monitoring cage and takes his mask off, we see the Alex Murphy we know and love. That's because the team at Teon and MGM were able to secure the likeness and voice acting talents of Peter effing Weller. Sorry, Dr. Peter effing Weller, to come back and reprise his role. With no disrespect to Robert John Burke, who did a serviceable job in Part 3, Weller is RoboCop and RoboCop is Weller. Getting him to come back digitally is a win that cannot be overstated. Prime Directive 2. Does it sound like RoboCop? As good as it looks, Rogue City could have dropped the ball on sound design and ruined how good those visuals are. This is where one of my few complaints come in for the game, as sound includes music, and whether due to full licensing or creative choices, the music falls flat, and that's when it exists at all. While the music is a letdown, the sound finds ways to fire on all cylinders, and that starts with RoboCop himself. You could have just licensed the looks of Peter Weller, but if the voice coming out of his mouth was different, it would have been a disaster. Not only do we get his voice, which, while sounding older, isn't as distracting as Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones when he's de-aged for the most recent film. He has the right cadence, and the scripting fits the character perfectly, including using iterations of some of his most famous lines, like when he discusses the possibility of there being trouble.
Drop it, scum.
Robo himself sounds great, from everything to his walk sound, to the pop of his handspike information extractor, to the sound of his famous Auto 9 shooting. Other characters sound great too, from Ed 209's vocal warnings to its screech upon defeat.
Everything is under control. Ed, stand I am now authorized to use physical force.
While Weller is the only voice actor from the original movies to come back, the other voice actors do an admirable job filling the void of Nancy Allen and Dan O'Herlihy as Lewis and the Old Man, respectively. We even have a new character in Max Becker who is made to sound like Bob Morton or Dick Jones from the original. This guy does such a convincing job that I had to look up whether or not the character was an original creation or someone from Part 2 that I'd just forgotten about. The rest of the audio, from explosions and gunfire to blood spurting and old Detroit itself, all hit the mark just right. Prime Directive 3. Does it feel like RoboCop? The short answer is yes. Good lord, does this feel like RoboCop. They got nearly everything right from the look and sound, but it goes deeper than that. The nightmare sequences of Robo glitching and hearing his family is a great callback to previous films, and all the stuff mentioned in the previous 2 Prime Directives get together and feel like, well, maybe should have got this for a third film instead of the kid-friendly downfall that is Part 3. Walking, shooting, and talking all feel like the titular hero, and for the first time in any game, even the fun ones, RoboCop and his universe are truly captured. Some of the things can be a bit too gamey, like side missions and leveling up, but I mean, what do you expect? It is a game. Having a family member of one of the original gang members be one of the main bad guys may seem dumb, but it works for Die Hard with a Vengeance just fine, and that's the best sequel in that franchise. If anything, the developers could have leaned even further into the universe. Any loading screens could have been used as advertisements, like the satirical ones found in the first 2 films, and while we get fun callbacks in graffiti or movie posters for things like the action hero Murphy's son idolizes, we could have had more of that.
Can you do that, Dad?
Occasionally, the missions or gameplay come up short in either how impactful the mission is, or that they just feel too samey, but there is more than enough bloody action and weapons to use to make up for it. The boss fights are few and far between, but they hit all the beats that tie things together, from a couple of Ed 209s to the repaired RoboCop 2 now housing the angry consciousness of the old man. The whole thing can be completed in about 12 to 15 hours, and a New Game Plus allows you to finish your upgrades while keeping the overpowered character you built in the first place. Reviews for the game have been solid if unspectacular, but gamers and most YouTubers have latched onto its spirit and sing its praises. It's sold well enough too since launch to not only become Nacon's biggest launch, and we're going to get a DLC expansion called Unfinished Business in the summer of 2025. Games like this and Terminator Resistance help break the assumption that some franchises just can't have good games. It's crazy to think that those are both from the same company, especially after they gave us one of the worst licensed games in the most recent Rambo entry. I would love to see this company tackle any number of other movie franchises that have been done dirty in the past, or never been given a chance to fly. But until then, I strongly suggest you give this game a chance on the platform of your choice.
Thanks for watching our retrospective on all things RoboCop. What would you like to see us cover next? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one. Bring Oreos.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.